Get comfortable, settle into your pillow, take a slow breath and let yourself relax. Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating and tragic elements of Hollow Knight's world, the infection. That creeping orange plague that consumed a kingdom, twisted minds, and turned a civilization into a graveyard. We'll trace its origins back to a forgotten god, follow its spread through every corner of Hallownest, and understand why it proved so impossible to stop. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments section, and if this helps you drift off, leave a like so I know to make more. Now close your eyes if you'd like, and let this story wash over you, carrying you gently towards sleep. The world before the infection. To understand the infection, we must first understand what came before it. Long before Hallownest existed, long before the Pale King arrived, the land beneath the mountain was home to countless bugs living simple, instinct-driven lives. They had no names, no history, no sense of self. They existed as animals do, eating, sleeping, reproducing, dying, without ever questioning their place in the world. But they were not alone. They were connected. A being of pure light watched over them. The Radiance, a moth goddess of immense power, linked all the bugs of the region through shared dreams. Her light touched their minds while they slept, creating a collective consciousness that bound them together. They didn't think as individuals because they didn't need to. They were part of something greater, extensions of the Radiance's will, basking in her eternal glow. This wasn't slavery exactly. The bugs under the Radiance's influence weren't suffering. They were content in the way that animals are content, free from doubt, free from fear, free from the burden of choice. The Radiance provided everything they needed: purpose, connection, belonging. In return, they gave her their worship, their dreams, their very selves. The moths were her most devoted followers. They built temples in her honour, sang songs of her glory, passed down her teachings through generations. The Radiance was their mother, their god, their reason for being. They loved her with the absolute devotion that only beings without individual will can offer. Let your breathing slow as you consider this ancient world. No kingdoms, no cities, no civilization as we understand it, just bugs living in harmony with a god who asked only to be remembered. It sounds almost peaceful, doesn't it? Almost perfect. But perfection never lasts. The arrival of the Pale King. Something came from beyond the borders of this land. Something ancient and powerful. A worm, a massive serpentine creature of pale light and terrible intelligence. Worms are beings of immense age and power, creatures that exist on a scale that makes ordinary life seem insignificant. This particular worm had travelled far seeking something. A place to rest, perhaps, a kingdom to build, a purpose to fulfill. When the worm arrived, it made a choice that would change everything. It shed its enormous form, dying as a worm and being reborn as something smaller, something that could walk among the bugs it wished to rule. The cast-off shell still lies in Kingdom's Edge, a monument to what the Pale King sacrificed to become what he chose to be. Why would a god make himself small? The game never tells us directly, but consider this. The worm's corpse is so massive it dwarfs everything around it. All that power, all that majesty. The Pale King traded it for a crown and a kingdom. He wanted to create something, to build, to shape a civilization in his image, and he did. The Pale King's light was different from the Radiance's. Where she offered connection and collective consciousness, he offered something else entirely. Awakening, individual thought, the ability to question, to choose, to be separate from the whole. His light touched the bugs of the region and kindled something new in their minds. Suddenly, they could think. They could remember. They could dream their own dreams instead of sharing the Radiance's. They became individuals, separate, distinct, alone in a way they had never been before. The Pale King called this a gift. He called it consciousness. He called it freedom. The bugs who received this gift built a kingdom. Hallownest rose from nothing into a civilization of remarkable sophistication. Cities were carved into the earth. Roads connected distant regions. Art and science flourished. The bugs of Hallownest developed systems of government and commerce, created beauty in forms that would endure for ages. It was a golden age, a time when it seemed that progress would continue forever. But the Pale King had made an enemy simply by existing. Let your body grow heavier as you consider this transformation. From collective consciousness to individual thought, from shared dreams to separate minds. The Pale King saw it as liberation. The Radiance saw it as theft. And the bugs caught between them had no idea what was coming. The Forgotten God. As the bugs of Hallownest embraced their new consciousness, they began to forget the Radiance, not naturally, not gradually. The Pale King actively suppressed her memory, erasing her temples, scattering her followers, replacing her worship with his own. He wanted to be the only light his subjects knew. The moths faced a choice. They could remain in the Radiance's light, part of her eternal dream, or they could accept the Pale King's gift and become themselves. One by one they chose freedom. One by one they forgot the goddess who had sustained them for eons. The seer, an elderly moth you meet in the resting grounds, speaks of this betrayal with quiet shame. Our light, our radiance, forgotten. Her words carry the weight of generations of guilt. The moths abandoned their god. They let her fade from memory, and in doing so, they set in motion a catastrophe that would consume everything. For a being like the Radiance, being forgotten is not merely painful, it is existential. Her power was tied to worship, to remembrance, to the minds that held her image. As those minds turned elsewhere, she diminished. Her light grew dimmer. Her presence grew weaker. Her very existence was threatened by the simple act of being ignored. Imagine being a god. Imagine having worshippers who loved you absolutely, who existed as extensions of your will, who gave you purpose and meaning. Now imagine watching them turn away, one by one, until no one remembers your name, until no one speaks your songs, until you become nothing more than a faded dream in minds that no longer care. The Radiance did not accept this fate. She could not. To accept it would be to cease to exist. And so she fought back in the only way she could, through the very dreams that had once connected her to her followers. Your eyelids are growing heavy now. Let them close if they wish. The story continues in the darkness behind them. The birth of the infection. The infection began as whispers in dreams, strange thoughts that didn't quite belong, a creeping orange glow at the edges of consciousness. The bugs of Hallownest didn't understand what was happening at first. They only knew that something was wrong, that their minds were no longer entirely their own, that a foreign presence was growing within them like a tumour made of light. The Radiance was forcing herself back into the minds that had forgotten her. She couldn't simply return to the way things were. The Pale King's gift of individual consciousness couldn't be undone, but she could make them remember. She could burn her image into their thoughts so deeply that they could never forget again. The lore tablet in the Shrine of Believers speaks to this. Light and memory sealed within, the radiance forgotten but not gone. The bugs of Hallownest had tried to move on, to build their civilization without her, to pretend she had never existed, but you can't simply forget a god. The memory lingers, buried deep, waiting for the moment when it can resurface. The problem was that individual minds weren't designed to contain a god. The collective consciousness the Radiance had once maintained was distributed across countless beings, each one carrying only a small piece of her light. But now, with each bug thinking separately, her attempts to reach them overwhelmed their individual minds. The infected changed. Their eyes took on an orange luminescence, the colour of the Radiance's light, burning where it didn't belong. Their movements became erratic, violent. They attacked friends and family, driven by impulses they couldn't understand or control. The Radiance's desperate attempt to be remembered was destroying the very minds she was trying to reach. This is the tragedy at the heart of the infection. The Radiance isn't evil. She's not trying to destroy Hallownest out of malice. She's trying to survive. She's trying to be remembered. But her method of forcing that remembrance is incompatible with the individual consciousness the Pale King created. She's a god trying to fit herself into minds that are too small to contain her. Those fully consumed became husks, their individual identities burned away by the Radiance's brilliance, leaving only shells that moved and fought in service of a god they had tried to forget. They weren't dead, exactly. Something still animated them. But the beings they had been, their memories, their personalities, their selves were gone, replaced by the Radiance's overwhelming presence. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on still water. The infection spreads through dreams, through the unconscious mind, through the vulnerable moments when we let go of waking thought. But you're safe here. This is just a story, just words carrying you toward rest. The spread through Hallownest. The infection didn't appear everywhere at once. It spread gradually, following patterns that the bugs of Hallownest struggled to understand. Some areas fell quickly, others held out for years. The reasons weren't always clear, but certain factors seemed to influence how fast the plague consumed each region. The Forgotten Crossroads was among the first areas to fall. Located near the surface, it served as a hub connecting many parts of the kingdom. Travellers passed through constantly, and with them came the infection. The crossroads became a nightmare of orange growths and mindless husks, its once busy passages transformed into death traps. The City of Tears held out longer. Its sophisticated infrastructure and concentrated population meant more resources for fighting the plague. The Soul Sanctum scholars worked desperately to find a cure, draining soul from living bugs in increasingly unethical experiments. They failed, but their efforts bought time. The city's fall, when it came, was all the more tragic for how long it had resisted. Deepness was different. The spiders and other creatures who lived there had never fully accepted the Pale King's rule. They maintained their own traditions, their own ways of thinking. This independence seemed to offer some protection. The infection spread more slowly through Deepness than through other regions, but it spread nonetheless. Even Hera the Beast, Queen of Deepness, couldn't protect her people forever. The Fungal Wastes presented a unique case. The mushroom creatures who lived there existed in a kind of collective consciousness of their own, not connected to the Radiance, but not fully individual either. The infection twisted this connection, turning the peaceful fungal network into something hostile and strange. The fungal core became a place of madness, where the boundaries between individual mushrooms blurred into something nightmarish. Greenpath fell to the infection despite its natural beauty. The lush vegetation couldn't protect the bugs who lived there. Un, the ancient slug god who had once watched over the region, retreated into slumber, unable or unwilling to fight the spreading plague. Her followers became husks like all the others, their devotion to a gentler god offering no immunity to the Radiance's desperate light. Let your body sink deeper into rest. The infection spread through a kingdom, but it cannot reach you here. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are drifting gently towards sleep. The nature of the orange light. What exactly is the infection? The game gives us clues, but never a complete explanation. We know it manifests as orange growths, bulbous, organic-looking masses that spread across surfaces and creatures alike. We know it glows with the Radiance's light. We know it affects the mind before it affects the body. The Hunter's Journal entry for the infected balloon reads, "Infected with the sickness of the mind, these creatures drift through the caverns spreading their infection." The key phrase is sickness of the mind. The infection isn't primarily physical, it's mental, psychological, spiritual. The orange growths are symptoms, not causes. The real infection happens in dreams, in thoughts, in the vulnerable spaces of consciousness. The orange colour is significant. It's the colour of the Radiance herself, the colour of her realm, the colour of the light she once shared with her followers. When you see that orange glow in an infected bug's eyes, you're seeing the Radiance looking back at you. She's in there, fragmented across countless minds, trying to reassemble herself from the pieces. The light seeds you find throughout the infected crossroads are described in the Hunter's Journal as seed of the infection, grows in the corpses of infected creatures. Even in death, the infection continues to spread. The Radiance's light doesn't need living hosts. It can grow in corpses, in walls, in the very stone of Hallownest. It's less like a disease and more like a hostile ecosystem, transforming everything it touches into an extension of the Radiance's will. The physical growth seem to be a side effect rather than the primary infection. They appear on bugs who have been infected for a long time, as if the Radiance's presence is literally reshaping their bodies. The growths pulse with light, sometimes releasing clouds of orange spores that can spread the infection further. They're tumours made of godhood, physical manifestations of a divine presence that doesn't belong. The infection spreads primarily through dreams. When a bug sleeps, their mind becomes vulnerable to the Radiance's influence. She slips in through the cracks in consciousness, planting seeds of her light that grow while the host is unaware. By the time symptoms appear, the orange eyes, the erratic behaviour, the infection is already deeply rooted. This is why the infection proved so difficult to fight. You can't build walls against dreams. You can't quarantine the unconscious mind. Every bug in Hallownest slept, and every time they slept they risked infection. The Radiance had found a vector that couldn't be blocked by any conventional means. Some bugs seemed more resistant than others. Those with strong wills, with clear purposes, with minds focused on something other than the Radiance's light. They lasted longer. The Mantis tribe's rigid discipline protected them almost entirely. Their code of honour gave them something to hold on to, a mental anchor that kept the Radiance's influence at bay. But resistance wasn't immunity. Given enough time, enough exposure, enough nights of vulnerable sleep, even the strongest minds could fall. The infection was patient. It had all the time in the world, and the Radiance had nothing left to lose. Your breathing has slowed. Your heartbeat is steady and calm. Let these details wash over you without holding on to them. They're just pieces of a story, carrying you toward rest. The Pale King's realization. The Pale King watched his kingdom begin to crumble. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for, was being destroyed by a force he couldn't fight with armies or walls or laws. The Radiance was attacking through dreams, through the very consciousness he had given his subjects. Against such an assault, conventional defences were useless. A law tablet in the White Palace speaks to his growing desperation. No cost too great, no mind to think, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering. These words would become the mantra of his terrible solution, the creation of the vessels. But before he reached that point, he tried everything else. He commissioned research into the nature of the infection. He supported the Soul Sanctum's experiments, even as they grew increasingly desperate and unethical. He sought allies among the other powers of Hallownest, the Mantis Lords, the Hive Queen, the ancient beings who predated his arrival. Nothing worked. The infection continued to spread. The Pale King was brilliant, but he was also proud. He had given the bugs of Hallownest consciousness, had lifted them from mindless existence into civilization. He couldn't accept that his gift had made them vulnerable. He couldn't accept that the Radiance's return was, in some ways, his fault. But it was. By awakening the bugs to individual thought, he had severed their connection to the Radiance. By suppressing her worship, he had driven her into desperation. By making himself the only light his subjects knew, he had ensured that when the Radiance fought back, she would fight with everything she had. Another tablet reads, "The worm becomes beacon, minds expanded, to yield, to devote." The Pale King wanted devotion. He wanted worship. He wanted to replace the Radiance entirely in the hearts of his subjects, but you can't simply erase a god from existence. The Radiance refused to be forgotten, and her refusal would cost the kingdom everything. The Pale King needed a different kind of solution. He needed something that could contain a god. He turned his attention to the void. Let your thoughts become weightless as you consider the Pale King's desperation. A god watching his creation fall apart. A father watching his children succumb to a plague he couldn't cure. Whatever else he was, brilliant, ruthless, cold, he was also afraid. And fear drives beings to terrible choices. The void and its properties. Deep beneath Hallownest, in a place called the Abyss, there exists something that defies easy description. The void is darkness given substance, emptiness made tangible. It pools in an ancient sea at the bottom of the world, black and still and utterly without light. The void is the antithesis of the Radiance in every way. Where she is light, it is darkness. Where she is consciousness and connection, it is emptiness and isolation. Where she burns with thought and dream and will, the void simply isn't. It has no mind for the Radiance to touch, no dreams for her to corrupt, no self for her to consume. The Pale King recognized this. If the Radiance attacked through consciousness, then a being without consciousness would be immune. If she spread through dreams, then a being that didn't dream couldn't be infected. If she overwhelmed individual minds with her presence, then a mind that was already empty would have nothing to overwhelm. This was the key. If the Pale King could create a being of pure void, a creature without thought or will or identity, that being could contain the Radiance. It could seal her away, trap her light within its emptiness, end the infection by imprisoning its source. The theory was elegant. The execution was monstrous. The Pale King and the White Lady produced children, eggs that were cast into the abyss to be filled with void. These children were designed to be hollow, empty, without self. They were called vessels, containers meant to hold something other than themselves. Thousands of them were created, thousands were tested, and thousands were found wanting. The problem was that life resists emptiness. Even beings born from void, even creatures designed to be hollow, develop traces of consciousness, a flicker of curiosity, a moment of fear, a hint of something that might, given time, become a self. These traces were tiny, almost undetectable, but they were enough to disqualify a vessel from its purpose. A vessel with any consciousness at all would be vulnerable to the radiance. Any crack in its emptiness would give her a foothold. Any hint of self would become a target for her desperate light. The Pale King needed perfection, and perfection proved almost impossible to achieve. The failed vessels were discarded, cast back into the abyss, left to die in the darkness that had birthed them. The floor of the abyss is covered with their shells, thousands of them, maybe more. Children of the Pale King, created and abandoned because they weren't empty enough. Let your body grow heavier as you consider this tragedy. The Pale King wasn't cruel by nature, he was desperate. He believed he was saving his kingdom, but the cost of that salvation was measured in the lives of his own children, sacrificed on the altar of an impossible standard. The Hollow Knight. One vessel seemed perfect. One climbed from the void sea and looked up at the Pale King with eyes that held nothing. No recognition, no curiosity, no hope, no fear. It was empty. It was hollow. It was exactly what the Pale King needed. This vessel was chosen. It was taken from the abyss, raised in the White Palace, trained for its purpose. It would become the Hollow Knight, the pure vessel, the container that would seal away the radiance and save Hallownest. The Hollow Knight was everything the Pale King had hoped for. It moved without hesitation. It fought without fear. It obeyed without question. When the time came to seal the radiance, it accepted its fate without resistance. It allowed itself to be chained in the Black Egg Temple, allowed the radiance to be forced into its empty shell, allowed the dreamers to seal the temple with their eternal sleep. This sealing worked. The infection stopped spreading. The bugs of Hallownest began to recover. The Pale King had saved his kingdom, or so he thought. The Hollow Knight was not as hollow as it appeared. Deep within its shell, hidden even from itself, was a tiny spark of consciousness, a whisper of will, a trace of self. It loved its father. It wanted to succeed. It felt pride in its purpose and fear of failure. These feelings were buried so deep that the Hollow Knight itself didn't know they existed, but they were there, and the radiance found them. Through that tiny crack, that minuscule flaw in the vessel's emptiness, the radiance worked. Year after year, century after century, she pressed against the walls of her prison. She exploited the Hollow Knight's hidden self, used its buried emotions as a foothold. Slowly, imperceptibly, she eroded the containment. The infection began to spread again. The path of pain, hidden deep within the White Palace, contains a secret that reveals the depth of this tragedy. If you complete its brutal platforming challenges, you find a memory, a vision of the Hollow Knight as a child, looking up at the Pale King. And the Pale King is reaching down, touching the vessel's face with something that looks almost like tenderness, almost like love. This is the crack. This is the flaw. The Hollow Knight wasn't supposed to feel anything, but it felt this. It loved its father. It wanted to make him proud. And that tiny spark of emotion, that minuscule deviation from perfect emptiness, was enough to doom everything. Feel your body growing heavier, sinking into the mattress. The story continues, but it asks nothing of you. Just listen. Just drift. The dreamers and their sacrifice. The sealing of the Radiance was not a simple act. It required multiple components, multiple sacrifices, multiple beings willing to give everything for the sake of the kingdom. The Hollow Knight served as the primary container, but around that container the Pale King constructed additional layers of protection. 3 seals, 3 barriers, 3 minds locked in eternal sleep, their dreams forming walls that would keep the Black Egg Temple closed, that would prevent anyone from reaching the Hollow Knight, that would maintain the containment even if the primary vessel began to weaken. These seals required consciousness. They required minds capable of dreaming, of maintaining a sustained mental state that could serve as a barrier. They required beings willing to surrender their waking lives, to enter a sleep from which they would never wake, to dream forever in service of a cause larger than themselves. Monomon the teacher agreed to become a dreamer out of intellectual conviction. She understood the theory behind the sealing, understood why it might work, understood the stakes if it failed. She was the head of the teacher's archives, a scholar devoted to knowledge and understanding. She gave up her waking life so that others might continue to learn. Lurien the Watcher agreed out of devotion. His loyalty to the Pale King was absolute. He would have done anything his king asked. When the Pale King needed a dreamer, Lurien volunteered without hesitation. He had found someone worthy of his complete dedication, and he gave it without reservation. Hera the Beast agreed for a price. She was the Queen of Deepnest, a fierce leader who put her people's welfare above all else. She would become a dreamer, would give up her waking life to maintain the seal. But in exchange, she wanted a child. The Pale King agreed, and from their union, Hornet was born. Each dreamer sleeps in their own location, their dreams forming 1/3 of the seal that keeps the Radiance contained. Monomon in the teacher's archives, Lurien in his spire above the City of Tears, Hera in the heart of Deepnest. Together their sleeping minds create barriers that reinforce the Hollow Knight's containment. But the dreamers could do nothing about the flaw in the primary vessel. They maintained their seals faithfully, dreamed their eternal dreams without complaint, and still the infection spread. Still the kingdom fell. Still the Radiance pressed against her prison, waiting for the moment when she could break free. Let your thoughts settle like dust in an ancient temple. The dreamers gave everything they had. It wasn't enough. Sometimes sacrifice isn't enough. Sometimes the best intentions lead to failure. But there's a strange peace in that truth. The peace of knowing that we can only do what we can do, and the rest is beyond our control. The kingdoms fall. The infection's return was gradual at first. A few isolated cases. Strange behaviour in bugs who had seemed healthy. Orange growths appearing in places that had been clean for years. The citizens of Hallownest didn't understand what was happening. They thought the plague had been defeated. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The Hollow Knight was failing. The Radiance was breaking free, and as her influence grew, the infection spread faster and faster. What had taken years to consume the kingdom the first time now took months, then weeks, Then days. A lore tablet in the Forgotten Crossroads captures the confusion of those final days. Higher beings, these words are for you alone. Our pure vessel has ascended. Beyond lies only the refuse and regret of its creation. The Pale King knew the sealing was imperfect. He knew the hollow night wasn't truly hollow, but he sealed it anyway, hoping that imperfect containment was better than none at all. The City of Tears fell into chaos. The Soul Sanctum scholars, who had never stopped their research, grew more desperate than ever. Soulmaster drained bug after bug, convinced that enough soul could purify anything. His victims became the mistakes and follies, failed experiments that shamble through the Sanctum's halls, tragic reminders of good intentions gone horribly wrong. The Mantis tribe sealed their borders. Their discipline had protected them before, and they trusted it to protect them again. They were right. The infection never fully penetrated their village, but they couldn't save anyone else. They could only watch as the kingdom around them crumbled. Deepness descended into darkness. Without Hera's waking leadership, the spiders and other creatures fell into conflict. Some embraced the infection, others fought it. The region became a nightmare of predators and prey, where survival meant trusting no one. The hive closed its doors. Queen Vesper protected her people as long as she could, her power keeping the infection at bay. But even she couldn't hold out forever. The bees became hostile to all outsiders, attacking anyone who entered their domain. They weren't evil. They were just protecting what was theirs. The Pale King retreated to his White Palace. As his paranoia grew, he filled his home with hazards, saw blades, spikes, death traps that would kill anyone who tried to reach him. Even his own servants were sealed in with him, their faces visible in the walls, frozen in eternal service. In the end, the Pale King died alone. His corpse sits on his throne, crown still on his head, surrounded by the bodies of king's moulds, the constructs he created to protect himself. How he died is never explained. Maybe the infection reached him. Maybe he gave up. Maybe, after everything, he simply chose to stop. The White Lady, his queen, speaks of him with a mixture of love and sorrow. It faced the Radiance. It sacrificed its own being for the kingdom's sake. But the vessel was not truly hollow. She knew. She always knew. The sealing was doomed from the start, and she went along with it anyway, because what else could they do? Your body is completely relaxed now. Your mind is quiet and still. The kingdom fell, but you are safe. You are comfortable. You are drifting gently towards sleep. The infected creatures. Throughout Hallownest, you encounter bugs who have been transformed by the infection. Each one tells a story of loss, a life interrupted, a mind consumed, a self erased by the Radiance's desperate light. The husks are the most common infected enemies, and the Hunter's Journal has much to say about them. They were ordinary citizens once, workers, travellers, residents of the kingdom's many regions. The Husk Wanderer's entry reads, "Wanders the caverns, mindlessly swinging a nail it can barely lift." The Husk Hornhead charges at threats, possibly mistaking them for the plants it once fed on. The Husk Bully, larger, stronger, but no smarter than its smaller kin. These entries paint a picture of bugs reduced to their most basic instincts. They remember fragments of their former lives, how to swing a nail, how to charge at threats, how to move through familiar tunnels, but the minds that gave those actions meaning are gone. They shamble through the ruins, attacking anything that moves. Their eyes glow orange, their movements are jerky and unnatural. Whatever they were before, they're gone now. Only the infection remains. The infected knights were warriors who fell to the plague. The hunter's journal notes, animated by a strange force, these husks will never cease their patrol. Their training makes them more dangerous than ordinary husks. They still remember how to fight, even if they've forgotten everything else. They block attacks, they dodge, they strike with precision that ordinary husks lack. Encountering them is a reminder that skill and strength offer no protection against the infection. The Radiance doesn't care how capable you were. She only cares that you remember her. The broken vessel is one of the most tragic encounters in the game. It's another vessel, one of your siblings, who escaped the abyss only to be consumed by the infection. When you find it in the ancient basin, orange growths burst from its cracked shell, and it attacks with desperate, erratic movements. When you fight it, you're fighting what you might have become. When you defeat it, you're granting it the peace it couldn't find in life. But the broken vessel's story doesn't end with its death. If you return with the dream nail and strike its corpse, you enter its dream, and there you face the lost kin. This is the broken vessel as it might have been, freed from the infection's corruption, fighting with the skill and grace it was designed to possess. The lost kin is faster, stronger, more coordinated than its infected form. It summons void balloons that drift through the arena, remnants of the siblings who died in the abyss. The hunter's journal entry for the broken vessel reads, "Shattered corpse, reanimated by infected parasites." But the Lostkin's entry is different. The vessel, though ruined, still holds a mind. Even in death, even in dreams, some fragment of consciousness remains. The Lostkin remembers what it was supposed to be. It fights you not out of malice, but perhaps out of a desperate need to prove itself, to show that it could have been the one chosen, if only things had been different. Defeating the Lostkin grants you a pale ore and 400 essence, but more than that, it grants closure. The broken vessel can finally rest, its dream ended, its struggle complete. It was never going to be the Hollow Knight. It was never going to save the kingdom. But in its final moments, in the dream realm where anything is possible, it got to fight as the warrior it was meant to be. The infected crossroads shows what happens when the infection fully consumes an area. The region transforms from a relatively peaceful hub into a nightmare of orange growths and hostile creatures. Paths that were safe become deadly. Enemies that were manageable become overwhelming. The infection doesn't just kill, it corrupts, transforms, make everything worse. Even the simplest creatures fell to the plague. The Gru's mother, a large fly who guards her eggs in the forgotten crossroads, becomes the infected Gru's mother after the transformation. More aggressive, more dangerous, her maternal instincts twisted into something violent. The Vengefly King, already territorial, becomes rabid with infection, attacking anything that enters its domain with mindless fury. The Boofleys drift through infected areas, their bodies swollen with orange light. The hunter's journal notes, "Infected with the sickness of the mind, these creatures drift through the caverns spreading their infection. They were harmless once, simple creatures going about simple lives. Now they're vectors for the plague, spreading the Radiance's influence wherever they float. Even the tick-ticks, those small crawling bugs that seem almost decorative, can become infected. Their eyes glow orange, their movements become erratic. They're not dangerous exactly, they're too small for that. but their infection is a reminder that the Radiance's reach extended to every corner of the kingdom, touching even the most insignificant creatures. Myla is perhaps the saddest example of the infection's cruelty, and she deserves more than a passing mention. She's a mining bug you meet early in the game, working alone in the Crystal Peak mines, cheerfully singing as she chips away at the rock. Her song is simple and sweet. Bury my mother pale and slight. Bury my father with his eyes shut tight. Bury my sisters 2 by 2. And then when you're done, let's bury me too. It's a morbid little tune, but Myla sings it with such innocent joy that it feels almost comforting. She's happy to see you when you visit. She talks about the crystals she's mining, about the strange humming she hears from deeper in the caves. She's curious about the world, eager to share her discoveries, genuinely pleased to have company in her lonely work. If you return to her later, after defeating certain bosses, you find her changed. The first sign is her song. The melody is the same, but the words have shifted. Bury the knight with her broken nail. Bury the lady, lovely and pale. Bury the priest in his tattered gown. Then bury the beggar with his shining crown. The lyrics have become darker, more focused on death and burial. Myla doesn't seem to notice the change. Visit her again, and the transformation has progressed further. Her eyes has begun to glow with that terrible orange light. She speaks of the humming growing louder, of dreams she can't quite remember, of a light calling to her from somewhere deep inside. She's frightened now, confused, aware that something is wrong but unable to stop it. The final visit is the worst. Myla no longer speaks. She no longer sings. She attacks you on sight, fully consumed by the infection, her cheerful personality burned away by the Radiance's desperate light. You have to kill her. There's no other option. No quest that cures her. No secret ending where she survives. You strike her down, and she drops a few geo. And that's the end of Myla's story. What makes Myla's fate so devastating is how preventable it feels. She was just a miner. She wasn't involved in the kingdom's politics or the conflict between gods. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, working too close to something that called to the Radiance, humming a tune that made her vulnerable. Her cheerful song couldn't protect her. Her innocent curiosity couldn't save her. The infection doesn't discriminate. It takes everyone eventually. Many players avoid returning to Crystal Peak after meeting Myla. They don't want to see her change. They don't want to be forced to kill her. But the game doesn't let you save her by ignoring her fate. Whether you witness it or not, Myla falls to the infection. The only choice you have is whether to be there when it happens. Let these sad stories drift past you like clouds. They're tragedies, yes, but they're also just stories. They can't hurt you. They can only carry you deeper into rest. The false night and the infection's reach. Even the first major boss you encounter tells a story about the infection's far-reaching effects. The false knight isn't infected in the traditional sense. He's a maggot who stole the armour of Hegemol, one of the 5 great knights. But his story is intertwined with the kingdom's fall. Hegemol was a gentle giant, massive and powerful but kind-hearted. His armour made him nearly invincible in battle, but the bug inside was soft, compassionate, devoted to protecting the weak. When the infection spread and the kingdom fell into chaos, something happened to Hegemol. The game never tells us exactly what. Perhaps he fell to the plague, perhaps he was killed by infected creatures, perhaps he simply disappeared in the confusion. What we know is that a maggot found his armour and claimed it for himself. This maggot had brothers in the forgotten crossroads, simple creatures who were being threatened by the infected husks that now roam the tunnels. The maggot put on Hegemal's armour and became the false knight, using stolen power to protect his family. The hunter's journal entry reads, "Weak creatures love to steal the strength of others. Their lives are brief and fearful, and they yearn for power they can never truly possess." It's a harsh judgment, but there's tragedy beneath it. The false knight isn't evil, he's desperate. He saw his brothers in danger and did the only thing he could think of to save them. When you defeat the false knight, his armour cracks and the maggot inside is revealed. Small, vulnerable, terrified. He flees into the floor, and if you break through after him, you find him curled up in a corner surrounded by his brothers, weeping. You can kill him there, or you can leave him be. Either way, his story is a reminder that the infection's effects extended far beyond those it directly consumed. It created a world of fear and desperation, where even the innocent were driven to terrible choices. The dream version of this fight, the failed champion, shows what the maggot wished he could be. Stronger, faster, more worthy of the armour he stole. In his dreams, he's a true champion, fighting with skill and power he never possessed in life. But dreams aren't reality, and the failed champion falls just like the false knight did. Some gaps can't be bridged, no matter how desperately we wish otherwise. Allow your muscles to release their tension now. The stories of the infection are heavy, but you don't need to carry them. Let them rest beside you as you drift towards sleep. The Radiance's perspective. It's easy to see the Radiance as a villain. She's the source of the infection, the cause of Hallownest's fall. The god whose desperate need to be remembered destroyed a civilization. But consider her perspective for a moment. She existed before the Pale King. She cared for the bugs of this land when they were simple creatures, connecting them through shared dreams, giving them purpose and belonging. She wasn't a tyrant, she was a mother in her way. Her followers loved her because she gave them something precious, the knowledge that they were never alone. Then the Pale King arrived and took everything from her. He gave her followers individual consciousness, severing their connection to her. He suppressed her worship, erasing her temples and scattering her followers. He made himself the only light his subjects knew, deliberately replacing her in their hearts and minds. The bugs didn't choose to forget the Radiance. They were made to forget. The Pale King's gift of consciousness came with a cost, the loss of their connection to the god who had sustained them for eons. They didn't abandon the Radiance out of cruelty. They abandoned her because they couldn't remember her anymore. And for a being like the Radiance, being forgotten is death. Her power was tied to worship, to remembrance, to the minds that held her image. As those minds turned elsewhere, she faded. She diminished. She faced extinction not through violence, but through neglect. What would you do if you were a god being erased from existence? If the beings you had loved and protected for eons suddenly couldn't remember your name? If your very existence depended on being remembered and no one remembered you anymore? The Radiance fought back. She fought desperately, clumsily, destructively. Her methods were terrible, forcing herself into minds that couldn't contain her, destroying the very being she was trying to reach. But she wasn't evil. She was dying, and dying beings don't always make good choices. This doesn't excuse the infection. It doesn't make the suffering of Hallownest's citizens acceptable, but it adds a layer of tragedy to the story. The Radiance and the Pale King weren't good and evil. They were two gods with incompatible visions, and the bugs caught between them paid the price for their conflict. Let your thoughts grow soft and formless. There are no villains in this story, not really. Just beings doing what they thought they had to do, and a kingdom that couldn't survive the consequences. The infection's symptoms. The infection progresses through stages, each one bringing the victim closer to complete consumption. Understanding these stages helps us appreciate the horror of what Hallownest's citizens faced, and the impossible choices they had to make. The first stage is subtle, strange dreams, thoughts that don't quite belong, a sense of something watching from the edges of consciousness. Most bugs don't even recognize these early symptoms. They dismiss them as stress, or fatigue, or the natural strangeness of dreams. By the time they realize something is wrong, the infection has already taken root. The second stage brings physical changes. The eyes begin to glow with a faint orange light. Behavior becomes erratic. Mood swings, confusion, moments of violence followed by periods of apparent normalcy. The infected bug knows something is wrong now, but they can't stop it. They can feel the Radiance's presence growing inside them, crowding out their own thoughts. The third stage is transformation. Orange growths appear on the body, spreading across the shell and into the flesh beneath. The infected bug's movements become jerky and unnatural, controlled more by the infection than by their own will. They may still have moments of clarity, but those moments grow rarer and shorter. The final stage is complete consumption. The individual is gone, replaced entirely by the Radiance's presence. The body continues to move, to fight, to spread the infection further, but the bug who once inhabited that shell has been erased. Their memories, their personality, their self, all burned away by a god's desperate light. Some bugs tried to fight the infection's progression. They sought cures, performed rituals, begged the Pale King for help. Nothing worked. Once the infection took hold, it couldn't be stopped. The best anyone could hope for was a quick death before the final stage, an ending that preserved some dignity, some sense of self. Others embraced the infection. The Traitor Lord of the Mantis tribe is the most notable example, and his story deserves closer examination. He was once a mantis like any other, bound by the tribe's rigid code of honor, devoted to the discipline that had protected his people for generations. But something changed. Something broke inside him. The Traitor Lord accepted the Radiance's light willingly, abandoning his people's code of honor for the power the infection offered. His betrayal was absolute. He led his followers into the Queen's gardens, where they slaughtered the White Lady's attendants. The traitor mantises you fight throughout that area are his corrupted disciples. He claimed the gardens as his domain, a festering wound in the heart of what was once a place of beauty and peace. The Hunter's Journal entry for the Traitor Lord is damning. Deposed Lord of the Mantis tribe, embraced the infection and turned against his sisters. His own family cast him out. The Mantis Lords, who might have been his sisters or his daughters, rejected him completely. When you defeat them and earn their respect, they bow to you, but they would never bow to him. He chose power over honor, infection over discipline, and in doing so he lost everything that made him a mantis. Why would anyone choose infection? The game doesn't give us a clear answer, but we can speculate. Perhaps the Traitor Lord was tired of the endless discipline, the rigid codes, the constant vigilance required to resist the Radiance's call. Perhaps he saw the infection spread as inevitable and decided to be on the winning side. Perhaps the Radiance's light offered something that the Pale King's consciousness couldn't, a return to the collective, an end to the loneliness of individual existence, a release from the burden of choice, or perhaps he was simply weak. The Mantis's resistance to the infection came from their discipline, their focus, their unwavering commitment to their code. If the Traitor Lord's commitment wavered, even for a moment, the Radiance would have found her foothold. One moment of doubt, one night of troubled dreams, and the infection would have begun its work. His daughter lies buried in the Queen's gardens. She fell in love with Zema, one of the 5 great knights, a forbidden romance between a mantis and an outsider. When she died, Zema retreated to the resting grounds to mourn, becoming the Grey Mourner. The Traitor Lord's corruption might have begun with grief, with the loss of his child, with the pain that made him vulnerable to the Radiance's whispers. We'll never know for certain. The Traitor Lord doesn't explain himself. He simply fights and dies, and leaves us to wonder what drove him to such a terrible choice. But his existence proves something important. The infection wasn't just a disease that happened to bugs. It was a choice some of them made, and that makes it all the more tragic. Your breathing is slow and steady now. Your body has settled completely. Let these details fade into the background, becoming part of the gentle rhythm carrying you towards sleep. The soul Sanctum's desperate research. In the City of Tears, a group of scholars dedicated themselves to finding a cure for the infection. The Soul Sanctum was their headquarters, a grand building filled with laboratories and research chambers, where the brightest minds in Hallownest worked to understand and defeat the plague. Their research focused on soul, the white energy that animates all living things. Soul is everywhere in Hollow Knight. You collect it from defeated enemies. You use it to heal and cast spells. It's the fundamental life force of the world, and the Soul Sanctum scholars believed it held the key to curing the infection. The theory made a certain kind of sense. If the infection was the Radiance forcing her light into minds, perhaps enough soul could purify that light. Perhaps concentrated soul could burn away the orange growths, restore the infected to their former selves, save the kingdom from destruction. Soul Master led the research. He was respected once, a brilliant mind devoted to saving his kingdom. But desperation corrupted him. As the infection spread and conventional methods failed, he turned to increasingly unethical experiments. He began draining soul from living bugs, not just collecting it passively, but actively extracting it, killing his subjects in the process. He convinced himself that the ends justified the means, that a few deaths were acceptable if they led to a cure that could save thousands. But the cure never came. No matter how much soul he collected, no matter how many bugs he killed, the infection continued to spread. Soul Master's experiments produced only failures, the mistakes and follies that shamble through the Sanctum's halls, tragic reminders of good intentions gone horribly wrong. The mistakes are exactly what their name suggests. They're the results of failed experiments, bugs whose souls were extracted and replaced with something else. They're not quite alive, not quite dead, not quite anything. They exist in a state of perpetual wrongness, attacking anything that moves because that's all they know how to do. The follies are worse. They're bugs who are subjected to more advanced experiments, their bodies twisted and transformed by Soulmaster's desperate attempts to find a cure. They float through the Sanctum, their forms barely recognisable as the bugs they once were. Soulmaster himself became something monstrous. His obsession with soul transformed him, gave him power but took his sanity. When you fight him, he's no longer the respected scholar he once was. He's a creature of pure desperation, still convinced that more soul, more experiments, more death will somehow lead to salvation. It never does. Soulmaster dies, and the Sanctum falls, silent, and the infection continues to spread. All those deaths, all that suffering, all that desperate research, and none of it made any difference. Let your mind release these dark thoughts. They're just stories of a fallen kingdom, echoes of a tragedy that happened long ago. You are here now, safe and warm, and drifting towards sleep. The Fungal Wastes and the Infection. The Fungal Wastes present a unique case study in how the infection interacted with different forms of consciousness. The mushroom creatures who lived there existed in a kind of collective awareness, not connected to the Radiance, but not fully individual either. They shared thoughts and experiences through their fungal network, communicating in ways that other bugs couldn't understand. When the infection reached the Fungal Wastes, it didn't simply consume the mushrooms the way it consumed other bugs. Instead, it twisted their collective consciousness, corrupting the network that connected them. The peaceful fungal community became something hostile and strange. The fungal core is the heart of this corruption. Deep within the wastes you find mushrooms that have been transformed by the infection. Larger, more aggressive, pulsing with orange light. The network that once allowed them to share thoughts now spreads the Radiance's influence, turning each mushroom into a node in a web of infection. Mr. Mushroom is an exception. This strange creature appears throughout Hallownest, speaking in cryptic phrases that seem to reference things beyond the game's world. He's clearly connected to the fungal network, but he hasn't been corrupted by the infection. How he's maintained his independence is never explained. Some players theorize that Mr. Mushroom's strange awareness, his apparent knowledge of things outside the game, protects him from the infection. The Radiance attacks through dreams and consciousness, but Mr. Mushroom's consciousness seems to exist on a different level entirely. He's aware of things the Radiance isn't, and that awareness might make him immune to her influence. Or maybe he's just weird. Hollow Knight is full of mysteries that are never fully explained, and Mr. Mushroom might be one of them. The Mantis tribe's resistance to the infection offers another perspective on how consciousness affects vulnerability. The Mantises maintain strict discipline, rigid codes of honour, clear hierarchies of authority. Their minds were focused, ordered, devoted to specific purposes. This mental discipline seemed to protect them from the Radiance's influence. The infection spreads through dreams, through the unconscious mind, through the vulnerable moments when we let go of waking thought. The Mantises never let go. Their discipline extended even to their sleep, their dreams ordered and controlled like everything else in their lives. The Radiance couldn't find a foothold in minds that never relaxed their guard. This suggests something important about the nature of the infection. It's not just a disease that spreads through contact. It's a mental phenomenon, a corruption of consciousness that requires certain conditions to take hold. Bugs with strong wills, clear purposes, disciplined minds, they could resist longer, sometimes indefinitely. But most bugs weren't mantises. Most bugs had ordinary minds, ordinary dreams, ordinary vulnerabilities, and for them, the infection was inevitable. Your eyelids are so heavy now, let them stay closed. The story continues in the comfortable darkness, asking nothing of you but to listen and drift. The Black Egg Temple. At the heart of Hallownest's response to the infection stands the Black Egg Temple. This structure, located in the Forgotten Crossroads, was built specifically to contain the Radiance. It's where the Hollow Night is sealed, where the Dreamer's barriers converge, where the fate of the kingdom was decided. The temple is not large, but it is significant. Its dark walls pulse with a kind of anti-light, a darkness that seems to absorb rather than reflect. The entrance is sealed by the combined dreams of the three dreamers, their sleeping minds forming barriers that cannot be passed by ordinary means. Inside the temple, the Hollow Night hangs in chains. It has been there for centuries, perhaps longer, holding the Radiance within its hollow shell. The chains aren't just physical restraints. They're part of the sealing magic, helping to contain the god trapped within the vessel. The temple's design reflects its purpose. Everything about it is meant to contain, to suppress, to hold back the light. The darkness isn't just aesthetic, it's functional, a counterweight to the Radiance's brilliance. The chains aren't just symbolic, they're necessary, helping to bind a god who refuses to be bound. But the temple was built around a flawed vessel. The Hollow Knight's hidden consciousness gave the Radiance a foothold, and over centuries she exploited that foothold. The chains began to strain. The darkness began to flicker. The sealing that was supposed to last forever began to fail. When you first enter the Black Egg Temple, you find the Hollow Knight in agony. It's fighting against itself, trying to contain the Radiance even as she tears it apart from within. Orange infection leaks from its shell. Its movements are erratic, desperate. It's been holding on for so long, and it can't hold on much longer. The battle against the Hollow Knight is one of the most emotionally complex in the game. You're not fighting a villain, you're fighting a victim. The Hollow Knight didn't choose this fate. It was created for this purpose, raised for this sacrifice, sealed away to suffer for eternity. And now, after centuries of torment, it's finally breaking. Some players feel guilty defeating the Hollow Knight. They understand that it's not the enemy, the Radiance is, but the Hollow Knight is in the way, and there's no other path forward. To end the infection, you have to go through the being who's been fighting it longest. Let your body sink deeper into rest. The Black Egg Temple is far away, in a kingdom that fell long ago. You are here now, safe and comfortable and drifting towards sleep. The Knight's role in ending the infection. You play as another vessel, one of the Hollow Knight's countless siblings. You were created in the same way, cast into the abyss to be filled with void, tested and found wanting. But unlike the Hollow Knight, you weren't chosen. You were discarded. Somehow you survived. You climbed out of the abyss, escaped the kingdom, wandered the wastelands beyond for years or decades. Something called you back. A pull you don't understand. A purpose you can't articulate. You return to Hallownest and find it in ruins, consumed by the infection you were created to prevent. Your journey through the game is a journey toward understanding. You learn about the infection, about the Radiance, about the Pale King's desperate plan and its ultimate failure. You discover that the Hollow Knight is breaking, that the sealing is failing, that the infection will consume everything if something isn't done. and you realise that you might be the solution. The game offers multiple endings, each representing a different approach to the infection. In the simplest ending, you defeat the Hollow Knight and take its place, becoming the new vessel that contains the Radiance. The sealing continues, but with a new container, one that might hold longer or might fail just as the original did. In another ending, you use the Dream Nail to enter the Hollow Knight's mind and confront the Radiance directly. With the help of the Void, you destroy her, ending the infection at its source. The Hollow Knight is freed from its torment. The kingdom is saved, or at least what's left of it. The true ending requires the most preparation. You must obtain the Void Heart, a charm that represents your acceptance of your void nature. You must break the Dreamer's seals, opening the Black Egg Temple, and you must face the Radiance at her full power, in her own realm where she is strongest. In this ending you become something new. The Void. Given focus, a being that has unified the Void, that has become more than just a vessel. You consume the Radiance entirely, ending her existence, ending the infection, ending the conflict that destroyed Hallownest. The God-Seeker ending adds another layer to this conclusion. If you've completed the Pantheon of Hallownest with the Void Heart equipped, the Void doesn't just consume the Radiance, it consumes the God-Seeker as well, erupting from her body in a tide of darkness that swallows everything. This ending suggests that the Void, once unified and given focus, might be just as dangerous as the Radiance ever was. One god is destroyed, but another might be born in its place. But even the standard true ending is ambiguous. The Radiance is gone, but so is the Pale King. The kingdom is saved, but it's already in ruins. The infection is ended, but most of its victims are already dead. Victory, such as it is, comes too late to matter for most of Hallownest's citizens. Let these endings drift past you without holding on to them. They're just possibilities, just ways the story might conclude. The important thing is that the infection can be ended. The important thing is that there's hope, even in the darkest circumstances. The infection's legacy. Even after the infection is ended, its effects linger. The ruins of Hallownest stand as monuments to what was lost. The shells of infected bugs litter the ground, reminders of lives cut short. The orange growths may fade, but the scars they left behind remain. Dirtmouth, the small town above Hallownest, is populated by survivors. Elderbug has lived there his whole life, watching the kingdom below fall into ruin. Sly was once a great warrior, now reduced to running a small shop. Iselda waits for her husband Cornifer, who maps the dangerous depths below. They have all been touched by the infection in some way, even if they weren't directly consumed by it. The infection changed the world. It ended a civilization, killed countless bugs, transformed a thriving kingdom into a graveyard. Even if the Radiance is destroyed, even if the plague is ended, Hallownest will never be what it was. The Golden Age is over. The Pale King is dead. The future, whatever it holds, will be built on the ruins of the past. But there's hope in those ruins. The knight's journey proves that even discarded things can have purpose. The survivors in Dirtmouth prove that life continues even after catastrophe. The endings of the game, ambiguous as they are, suggest that the cycle of infection and sealing can be broken, that something new can emerge from the ashes of the old. Hornet survives, the daughter of the Pale King and Hera the Beast. She carries the legacy of both her parents. She's fierce and capable, a warrior who has dedicated herself to protecting what remains of Hallownest. Her dialogue throughout the game reveals her understanding of the infection's nature. The vessel has failed. The plague spreads. The kingdom falls. She knows what's happening. She's known all along. And she's been preparing for the moment when someone would have to finish what her father started. In Hollow Knight's Silksong, she'll have her own adventure, her own story, her own chance to shape the future. The infection may have destroyed Hallownest, but it didn't destroy her. And as long as she survives, the legacy of the kingdom survives with her. The infection was terrible. It destroyed everything it touched. But it wasn't the end. Life continues, stories continue, and somewhere, in the ruins of a fallen kingdom, new possibilities are waiting to be discovered. Your breathing is slow and peaceful now. Your body is completely relaxed. Let these thoughts of hope and continuation carry you the rest of the way to sleep. The deeper mysteries of the infection. There are aspects of the infection that the game never fully explains, mysteries that linger at the edges of the lore, inviting speculation and interpretation. Let's explore some of these deeper questions as you drift towards sleep. Why did the infection manifest as orange? The radiance is associated with light, with brilliance, with the sun. Orange is the colour of sunset, of fire, of warmth pushed to its extreme. Perhaps the orange represents the Radiance's light corrupted by desperation, no longer the pure brilliance she once offered, but something hotter, more dangerous, more destructive. Or perhaps the orange represents the Radiance's rage. She was forgotten, abandoned, left to fade into nothing. Her light, once gentle and connecting, became angry and consuming. The orange might be the colour of a god's fury, burning everything it touches because it can no longer nurture. Why did the infection spread through dreams specifically? Dreams are the realm of the unconscious, the place where the mind lets go of control. The Radiance once connected her followers through shared dreams, creating a collective consciousness that bound them together. When she was forgotten, dreams became her only way back in, the one door that remained open when all others had been closed. There's something poetic about this. The Pale King gave his subjects individual consciousness, waking minds that could think and choose for themselves, but he couldn't control their dreams. In sleep, the bugs of Hallownest returned to a state closer to what they had been before, vulnerable, open, connected to something larger than themselves. The Radiance exploited this vulnerability, turning the one realm the Pale King couldn't control into a weapon against him. Why couldn't the infection be cured? Soulmaster tried. The scholars of the Soul Sanctum tried. Countless bugs must have sought remedies, performed rituals, begged for salvation. Nothing worked. Once the infection took hold, it couldn't be stopped. Perhaps this is because the infection wasn't really a disease. It was a god forcing herself into minds that couldn't contain her. You can't cure divine possession with medicine or magic. The only solution was to deal with the god herself, to contain her as the Pale King tried, or to destroy her as the night eventually does. Or perhaps the infection couldn't be cured because the bugs of Hallownest, on some level, wanted to be infected. They had been given individual consciousness, but that consciousness came with loneliness, with doubt, with the burden of choice. The Radiance offered a return to the collective, an end to isolation, a reconnection with something greater than themselves. Some part of them might have welcomed her light, even as it destroyed them. These are just theories, of course. The game doesn't give us definitive answers. But the mysteries are part of what makes the infection so compelling. It's not just a plot device, but a phenomenon that invites deeper thought and interpretation. Let your mind wander through these mysteries without trying to solve them. They're questions without answers, puzzles without solutions. They exist to be contemplated, not resolved. And contemplation is a gentle thing, a soft activity that asks nothing of you but attention. The infection and the void. The void is the infection's opposite in every way. Where the radiance is light, the void is darkness. Where she is consciousness and connection, it is emptiness and isolation. Where she burns with thought and dream and will, the void simply isn't. This opposition is why the Pale King chose the void as his weapon against the Radiance. A being of pure void would have no mind for her to touch, no dreams for her to corrupt, no self for her to consume. The vessels were designed to be immune to the infection by virtue of being empty. But the opposition goes deeper than that. The void and the radiance represent two fundamental approaches to existence. The radiance offers connection at the cost of individuality. Her followers were part of something greater, but they weren't themselves. The void offers emptiness at the cost of everything. Beings of void have no self to lose, but they also have no self to keep. The Pale King's gift of individual consciousness sits between these extremes. His subjects were themselves separate and distinct, capable of thought and choice. But they were also alone, isolated, vulnerable to the loneliness that comes with being an individual in a vast and indifferent world. The infection can be seen as the Radiance's attempt to pull the bugs of Hallownest back toward connection. She wanted them to remember her, to be part of her again, to return to the collective consciousness they had lost. But individual minds couldn't handle that kind of connection anymore. The Pale King's gift had changed them too fundamentally. They could no longer be part of the Radiance without being destroyed by her. The Knight's journey represents a different path. By embracing the void, by becoming the void-given focus, the Knight transcends both the Radiance's connection and the Pale King's isolation. It becomes something new, a being that is empty but also unified, that contains the void without being consumed by it. This might be the true solution to the conflict between the Radiance and the Pale King. Not connection, not isolation, but something else entirely. A third way that neither god could have imagined. Your thoughts are growing softer now, more distant. Let them drift away like clouds, leaving only the gentle rhythm of your breathing and the comfortable weight of sleep pressing down on you. The infected locations. Let's take a gentle tour through the infected areas of Hallownest, visiting each one briefly as you drift towards sleep. The Forgotten Crossroads was once a busy hub, connecting the various regions of the kingdom. Travellers passed through constantly. Merchants sold there, wares, and the sounds of life filled the tunnels. Now it's a nightmare of orange growths and mindless husks. The infection has transformed it completely, turning familiar paths into death traps. When you first visit the crossroads, they're relatively peaceful, infected but not overwhelmingly so. Later, after certain events trigger, the area transforms into the infected crossroads. The change is dramatic and disturbing. Enemies become more numerous and aggressive. Orange growths cover surfaces that were previously clean. The area that once felt like a starting zone becomes genuinely dangerous. The City of Tears retains some of its former grandeur even in ruin. The eternal rain still falls. The architecture still impresses. The sense of a great civilization lingers in every corner. but the infection has touched it too. Husks wander the streets. The soul sanctum pulses with corrupted energy. The great city has become a mausoleum, beautiful and dead. The fungal wastes pulse with a different kind of infection. The mushrooms here were always strange, but the Radiance's influence has made them hostile and aggressive. The fungal network that once allowed peaceful communication now spreads corruption. The deeper you go, the worse it gets, until you reach the fungal core and find mushrooms transformed into something barely recognizable. Deepness was always dangerous, but the infection has made it worse. The spiders and other predators have become more aggressive, more territorial, more willing to attack anything that moves. The darkness feels heavier here, more oppressive, as if the infection has seeped into the very air. The ancient basin holds the entrance to the abyss, where the void pools in its ancient sea. The infection hasn't touched this place as heavily. The void seems to repel it, creating a kind of buffer zone. But the creatures here are still dangerous, still hostile, still part of a kingdom that has fallen into ruin. Kingdom's edge is where the worm's corpse lies, a monument to what the Pale King sacrificed to become what he chose to be. The infection has reached even here, touching the creatures who live in the shadow of a dead god. The area feels liminal, transitional, a place between what was and what might be. Bardoon lives here, an ancient caterpillar so old he remembers the time before the Pale King. When you speak to him about the infection, his words are heavy with the weight of ages. This old kingdom, it's full of the Pale One's influence. His reach is vast, but so too was hers once. He remembers the Radiance. He remembers what the world was like before Hallownest existed, before the Pale King gave bugs the burden of thought. They were content once, simple, united under her light. Now look at them, scattered, suffering, alone. Bardoon doesn't take sides in the conflict between gods. He's too old for that, too tired, too aware that both the Radiance and the Pale King were flawed in their own ways, but his perspective is valuable. He's one of the few beings who can speak about the infection with true understanding, not as a plague that appeared from nowhere, but as the inevitable consequence of a conflict that began long before Hallownest was built. Each location tells its own story of the infection's spread. Each one shows a different aspect of the tragedy that befell Hallownest. Together, they paint a picture of a kingdom consumed by a god's desperate need to be remembered. Let these locations fade from your mind now. They're just places in a game, just settings for a story. You are here, in your own place, safe and comfortable and drifting towards sleep. The infection's victims. Throughout your journey you encounter bugs who've been touched by the infection in various ways. Some are fully consumed, mindless husks attacking anything that moves. Others retain fragments of their former selves, trapped in bodies they no longer control. Still others have found ways to resist, to hold on, to maintain some semblance of who they were. The Moss Prophet in Greenpath speaks of the ancient slug god who once watched over the region. The prophet is infected. You can see the orange in its eyes, but it still remembers its devotion. It still speaks of Un with reverence, still maintains its faith even as the infection consumes it. There's something tragic and beautiful in that persistence. The husk guards in the City of Tears were once protectors, warriors who defended the capital from threats. Now they attack anyone who enters, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Their training remains. They still fight with skill and coordination, but but the minds that directed that training are gone. Cloth is a warrior you meet several times throughout the game. She's not infected, but she's been affected by the infection's consequences. She's searching for a glorious death, a meaningful end to her life. In a kingdom consumed by plague, she's looking for purpose in the chaos. If you help Cloth in certain ways, she appears during the Traitor Lord fight, sacrificing herself to help you defeat him. Her death is what she wanted, a warrior's end, fighting against the infection's corruption. It's sad, but it's also what she chose. In a world where so many deaths are meaningless, hers has meaning. Tiso is another warrior seeking glory, though his fate is less noble. He's arrogant and dismissive, convinced of his own superiority. If you progress far enough in the game, you find his body in Kingdom's Edge, killed by something he couldn't handle. His shield lies nearby, broken. His quest for glory ended in anonymous death. These characters remind us that the infection didn't just kill bugs, it disrupted lives, ended stories, cut short journeys that might have led somewhere meaningful. Each victim was a person with hopes and fears and dreams. The infection took all of that away. Your eyelids are so heavy now, let them stay closed. These stories of loss and tragedy are fading into the background, becoming part of the gentle rhythm carrying you towards sleep. The infection and memory. Memory plays a crucial role in the infection's spread and the Radiance's power. She was forgotten, and that forgetting nearly destroyed her. She forced herself back into minds through dreams, making them remember her whether they wanted to or not. The infection is, in a sense, a disease of memory, a forced remembrance that overwhelms everything else. The seer speaks of this with quiet shame. The moths were the Radiance's most devoted followers, and they were the ones who forgot her most completely. Their betrayal wasn't intentional. The Pale King's influence made them forget. But it was betrayal nonetheless. The seer carries the guilt of her entire tribe, the weight of a god abandoned by those who should have loved her most. The dream nail allows you to read the memories and thoughts of various characters. Some of these readings reveal the infection's effects on the mind. Infected bugs often have fragmented thoughts, broken memories, echoes of who they were before the Radiance consumed them. They remember pieces of their former lives, but those pieces no longer connect to anything coherent. The Hollow Knight's dream reading is particularly poignant. When you use the dream nail on it during the final battle, you see a single word: Father. Even after centuries of torment, even while being torn apart by the Radiance, the Hollow Knight remembers the Pale King. That memory, that love, was the crack in its emptiness that allowed the infection to take hold. Memory is both weapon and weakness in Hollow Knight's world. The Radiance uses memory to spread her influence, forcing bugs to remember her even as that remembrance destroys them. But memory is also what makes the bugs of Hallownest who they are. Their experiences, their relationships, their sense of self. To lose memory is to lose identity. To be forced to remember is to be consumed. The Knight has no memories, or at least none that the game reveals. It's a vessel, designed to be empty, and that emptiness extends to its past. This might be why it can resist the infection where others couldn't. With no memories for the Radiance to exploit, no past for her to corrupt, the Knight is immune to her primary weapon. Let your own memories grow soft and distant now. They'll be there when you wake, but for now, let them rest. Let everything rest. You are drifting towards sleep, and sleep asks nothing of you but surrender. The infections end. In the true ending of Hollow Night, the infection ends completely. The night, having become the void-given focus, consumes the Radiance entirely. Her light is extinguished. Her influence fades. The orange growths that covered Hallownest begin to wither and die. But what does this mean for the bugs who were infected? The game doesn't show us their fate directly. We don't see husks returning to normal, don't witness the infected regaining their minds. The implication seems to be that those fully consumed are beyond saving. The Radiance's destruction ends the infection's spread, but it doesn't restore what was already lost. This is consistent with how the infection works. It doesn't just suppress the victim's consciousness, it burns it away, replacing it with the Radiance's presence. When the Radiance is destroyed, that presence disappears, but there's nothing left to take its place. The infected bugs are empty shells, animated by a god who no longer exists. Some fans theorize that partially infected bugs might recover. Those who hadn't been fully consumed, who still retained fragments of their former selves, might be able to rebuild from those fragments. The infection's end might give them a chance to heal, to reclaim what was taken from them, but this is speculation. The game ends with the Radiance's destruction, and we don't see what comes after. The infection is over, but the damage it caused remains. Hallownest is still in ruins. Most of its citizens are still dead. The kingdom that the Pale King built is gone, and nothing can bring it back. What remains is possibility. The infection's end means that something new can begin. The survivors can rebuild, can create something different from what was lost. Hornet carries the legacy of both her parents, the Pale King's brilliance and Hera's fierce love. She might be the one to shape whatever comes next. The infection was terrible. It destroyed a civilization, killed countless bugs, turned a golden age into a nightmare. But it's over now. The Radiance is gone. The plague has ended, and somewhere, in the ruins of a fallen kingdom, new stories are waiting to be told. Your breathing is slow and peaceful. Your body is completely relaxed. The infection story is over, and yours continues tomorrow. But for now, there is only rest. Only the gentle weight of sleep pressing down on you. Only the comfortable darkness behind your closed eyes. The infection in context. The infection represents the failure of containment as a solution. The Pale King tried to seal the Radiance away, to lock her in a prison of void and dreaming minds. But containment isn't resolution. The problem wasn't solved, it was postponed. And when the containment failed, the problem returned worse than before. This pattern repeats throughout Hollow Night. The Dreamers seal the Black Egg Temple, the Mantises seal their borders, the Hive closes its doors. Everyone tries to lock the infection out, to build walls against a plague that spreads through dreams, but seals break, walls fall. The only lasting solution is the one the night eventually finds, not containment, but destruction. Not sealing the Radiance away, but ending her entirely. The night's journey represents a different approach to problems. Instead of avoiding the source, the night confronts it directly. Instead of postponing the crisis, the night ends it. This is harder, more dangerous, more costly, but it's also permanent. The infection won't return because there's nothing left to return. Let your mind release these thoughts. They're just themes woven through a story. They don't require anything from you right now. Just let them drift away as you sink deeper into rest. The quiet after the plague. Imagine Hallownest after the infection ends. The orange growths are withering, fading, disappearing from surfaces they've covered for centuries. The air feels cleaner, lighter, free of the oppressive presence that has haunted the kingdom for so long. The husks have stopped moving. Without the radiance to animate them, they're just shells now, empty, still, finally at peace. The bugs they once were are gone, but at least the mockery of their existence has ended. They can rest now, truly rest, in a way they couldn't while the infection controlled them. Dirtmouth is quiet. Elderbug sits on his bench, watching the well that leads down to the kingdom below. He's seen so much change, so much loss, so much tragedy. But he's still here. He's survived. And now, with the infection ended, he might finally be able to hope for something better. The City of Tears still stands, its grand architecture enduring despite everything. The rain still falls, eternal and melancholic, but there's something different about it now. It feels less like mourning and more like cleansing, washing away the corruption, preparing the city for whatever comes next. The Mantis village is unchanged. The Mantises maintained their discipline throughout the infection, and they'll maintain it now that it's over. They bow to worthy opponents, guard their borders, continue their ancient traditions. Some things endure regardless of what happens around them. Greenpath is growing again. Without the infection's corruption, the plants and fungi can flourish as they once did. Un stirs in her sleep, perhaps sensing that the threat has passed. The region that was once a garden might become one again, given time and care. The abyss is silent. The void pools in its ancient sea, dark and still and patient. It has served its purpose. The night used its power to destroy the radiance. Now it waits, as it has always waited for whatever comes next. This is the world after the infection. Damaged, yes. Changed, certainly. But not destroyed, not hopeless. There's room for new growth, new stories, new possibilities. The infection took so much, but it didn't take everything. Let this image of quiet recovery carry you towards sleep. The plague has ended, the kingdom is at peace, and you too can rest now, knowing that even the darkest stories can have endings that leave room for hope. Final thoughts. The infection story is complete. You've traced it from the Radiance's ancient reign through the Pale King's arrival, through the forgetting and the desperate return, through the spread and the sealing and the eventual end. You've met its victims, Myla with her darkening song, the broken vessel fighting in dreams, the countless husks who were once citizens with names and lives and hopes. What remains is rest. The kingdom is quiet now. The orange light has faded, the radiance is gone, and with her, the plague that consumed everything she touched. Hallownest will never be what it was, but it can be something new, something different, something that grows from the ruins of what came before. Your journey through this lore is complete. The infection has been explained, explored, understood. Now let it settle into the back of your mind where it can rest until you need it again. Sleep well, little knight. Sleep well. But perhaps you're still awake, still listening, still wanting a few more gentle words to carry you the rest of the way. The radiance is gone, but light remains, the soft glow of your screen, the pale light filtering through your window, the warmth behind your closed eyelids. Light isn't evil, it never was. The radiance was just a being trying to survive, trying to be remembered. Her methods were terrible, but her fear was understandable. We all want to matter. We all fear being forgotten. The Pale King is gone, but consciousness remains. Your consciousness, drifting now toward the unconsciousness of sleep. Consciousness is a gift and a burden. just as it was for the bugs of Hallownest. It lets us think and choose and be ourselves. It also lets us worry and doubt and feel alone. But you're not alone right now. These words are with you. The story is with you. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of your mind, the characters of Hollow Knight are with you too, resting finally after everything they endured. The infection spread through dreams, but your dreams tonight will be peaceful. The plague consumed a kingdom, but it cannot touch you here. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are drifting. The void embraces you, not as darkness, but as comfort, as the absence of worry, as the soft, still nothing that comes before dreams. Sleep well.